Now, before I do any of these presentations, I like to do a little bit of research about how the audience likes to influence, okay? Because influence is my specialist subject. So I went to Twitter. Seems like you had a good party last night. Amongst the arm wrestling, I noticed Chris from Sheffield. Chris from Sheffield. Oh, bopping with the exec. Looks like he was having a good time. I don't know what the candy floss had to do with anything, right? But the absolute prize goes to Gareth from Guildford. Punch and Judy, yes. Definitely not under duress. I think you volunteered for that. Under the influence, most certainly. Not necessarily the way I'm going to be talking to you about influencing now. Okay, just a little bit of a light-hearted start to that, because I think it's influence, and the subject of influential leadership is a serious subject, and I've been picking up the vibes on some of the challenges you have. But just a little bit about me. The first thing is, I've been 10 years studying, researching and working in the field of power and influence and its practical use in the workplace. That is my sole occupation, my sole passion, helping people with integrity to become more influential. Another thing you probably don't know about me is that I've got a background in IT, having been a programmer and a coder. And I can actually program, or have coded, in over 20 different languages. So I've got a little bit of an affinity for the world that you come from. And over the last 10 years, I've probably been working with several thousand people from the IT world, IS world, and certainly more technical orientations. So I understand a lot about the influencing problems that you have. Okay? Some of those problems, like, as Luke was saying, about being piggy in the middle. Other people I've been talking to have been talking about not necessarily being understood by the faculty and the people within the senior level within the institutions, and maybe even being the tail end Charlie, left to pick up the pieces after the decisions have been made. Those problems are the sort of problems that we come across time and time again, helping people with integrity who want to do the very best for their organisation, for their institution, to actually make things happen. So what I'm here to do today is threefold. I've been asked to come, firstly, to get you to, or to encourage you to take a look at the way you conduct your role. And some of this feeds into what Paul was talking about earlier on, but the orientation in which, and the way you come, the attitude you bring to your role. And I'm not going to ask you to stand up, name and shame. I'm going to, so let you to think that one through as we go through the session. The second thing I've been asked to do is to give you a toolkit, okay, of things you can actually do. Now, I gather, apart from it being streamed on video and YouTube, you've also got a PDF of this presentation, or will have a PDF available to you. That's going to be quite necessary, because I do go quite fast, all right? Because my third objective here is to help you as much as I possibly can to go through giving you ideas, giving you practical things that you can do. And as we're going through this, this is just some of the places where my material has been used. But as we go through this, I want you to be thinking practically about the challenges that you face, what you've got in front of you, what you've got to get done. Because I do want to go quite fast with this. We may get a bit of time at the end for a few questions. Depends on the download speed. The upload speed is going to be quite slow. Right? But I want to get through as much material as I possibly can in the shortest possible space of time. So the implication is you've got to think quite hard on your own as we go through. So let's just start looking at leadership. Leadership, Paul has had his view on it in being the behaviours. In the book that I've just written on influential leadership, what I'm trying to do is to get people to think about leadership in a slightly different way. Leadership is about outcomes. It's about getting the job done. So the definition that I put up there about what influential leadership is about having a vision or a goal and actually striving towards achieving that with the help and support of others. If you haven't got the help and support of others, you're going to be struggling. And there's a couple of things I just really want to quickly point out. Vision or goal, one of the problems I view in leadership at the moment is the vision and goal is very near term. Fix these problems. We've got some fires to put out. We've got some crises to manage. It doesn't get out to the longer term anywhere like as much as it could do. Okay, and I'll tell you why I think that in a moment. But that's an important thing. So to be, in my view, my vision of a truly influential leader, you've got to have a big vision, a big goal, a big somewhere where you're trying to go. And I bet you're sat there thinking, how the devil do we do that when we've got all of these problems in front of you? Okay? And that's one of the things I think is, you know, in leadership development courses is omitted, the reality of what you face right now. So the other thing, just to point off before I go on to how you might do this, is the help and the support of others. You know, I mean, it's been said so many times before that, you know, you cannot actually survive, you cannot get things done without that help and support. But it's the extent to which you get people to go that extra mile, to go that much further, I think is the mark of great leadership. Because, I mean, it's a question I ask quite a lot, and I'm not going to ask you to sort of answer this, but you might answer it in your own mind. How many great leaders are there in your institution? Okay, probably one or two you might be able to mention, but usually people start to struggle. I mean, you can, you know, worry about defining that a little bit later, what a great leader is. But part of the problem, I believe, is there is so much short-termism, so much we've got to do right now, not enough for the long term. People haven't got the time to actually make leadership happen, which is why I've come up with this little model. And it's all about having a purpose, what the grand purpose is. What are you there to do? What are you trying to drive towards? What is your vision of the future? Once you get that, you can start to have passion. Okay? And passion really moves people. Okay? It makes a huge difference, and that will be a theme throughout you on that journey. And then you start to make progress. And on it's how you really want to go. So everything that I'm doing now, effectively, to create the time to look towards a bigger tomorrow. Okay? How can you actually manage some of these challenges that are persistently coming at you from other members of your institution, from the dean or the chancellors? How can you actually change that? How can you influence that so that you've got a little bit more time? Okay? And this is the challenge, managing the short term and the long term. And if you can do that, I think you're well on your way to becoming an influential leader in your institution. So just remember that. If you can start to make more progress, you can start to create some space so that you can find what is it you really want to do, what is your real vision, and you can start to do some of the behaviours that Paul has been talking about earlier on. Here's a way of doing it. If you work out, and this has taken me 10 years to come up with 6 words, right, and I want you to bear this in mind. The purpose of this is to give you a guide on influencing towards a specific goal. So step number 1 is developing a very clear focus. When I'm working either executive coaching or working on workshops with people, most of the time people have an influencing aim. I wish they'd support this. I wish they'd do that. It would be great if they could be a bit more supportive in this. That's not specific enough for me, right? It may appear to be a little bit soft and woolly and difficult, but you can pin these things down, because when it comes to influence, it is about changing people's mindset, changing people's beliefs, and ultimately changing their hearts and then their actions. And if you can get that wrapped together in a nice, smart goal, you'll be able to automatically start to move forward an awful lot more quickly. The second thing then, once you've got that focus, once you know what you're trying to achieve, you can move forward to identify the stakeholders. Paul was already talking about the different types of stakeholders, but quite often what I find is people are focusing on the wrong stakeholders. Most people focus on the stakeholders who are nearest and best known to them, the ones they can have a good conversation with, rather than necessarily the ones that they should be focusing on. So if you've got a clear, okay, that's what I want to do, I mean, none of this is complicated. It's about really streamlining and actually getting some clear concentration on what it is you want to make happen. Then you can identify who are the most powerful people who can have an impact either for or against, positive or negative, what I'm trying to achieve. Once you've done the identification, you can then do some analysis, and I'll show you this in a moment. I'll show you how I do it, which is slightly different to a traditional stakeholder management approach. Analysing the quality of the relationship that you have with each of these individuals, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment, but also, are they on-side or off-side? You know, do they agree with what it is you're trying to do, your purpose, your vision, where you're trying to lead your part of the organisation or the institution? Once you've done the analysis, you can come up with a plan or a strategy. How are you going to move forward? Who are the stakeholders who you absolutely must engage with, or who are the ones that you can actually, okay, we'll put them to one side. We'll focus my time on making sure that the relationship is absolutely spot on with these individuals. So you then come up with a cunning plan, and sometimes that's mind-numbingly simple. Okay? One guy was doing this. I said to him, okay, so what's the one thing that you could do to dramatically improve your progress towards your purpose? Get a project manager. Yeah? How are you going to do that? Well, we've already got the budget, we've just never arranged it yet. You know, so sometimes it's the very simple things that delude you, or that you cannot actually see because you're so perhaps stressed. So once you've got a plan, you then go and engage with the stakeholders, and there's a variety of different things you can do. So this is where some of the behaviours that come in that Paul was talking about, how you actually form those relationships, how you actually understand the other person, how you listen to their needs and their issues, and then you can start to move and influence them. And then perhaps the most important one for me is the maintain. Because when it comes to stakeholder management, it's not a one-hit thing. You've got to do it on a repeated basis, on a regular basis, so that as you go out to engage slightly differently with your stakeholder community, you'll be learning a lot more. Bring it back to the team and think, OK, now what? We thought this was our assumption. We've now found that it's not quite right. What are we going to do differently now? And so keep going round. And what we generally find is when we're taking people round this very simple process, is you get round to planning or analysing and planning, and you think, no, we've got the focus wrong. We need to move back. We're either too big or too small to be able to make some practical progress on this. And that's fine. But if you keep coming back to these 6 words, you will start to progressively make more progress. So let's just focus now on the analyse. Stakeholder mapping. You've done stakeholder mapping, I know. The usual one, which Paul mentioned, was about power and interest. Where my approach is slightly different is the bottom, the relationship. Okay? Relationship is key, critical to influence. If you ask yourself, when are you most influenced by others, my bet would be it's usually when you've got a good relationship with them, when you trust that other person, you believe what they're saying is the truth, you understand that they've got empathy for you, they understand you, you're more likely to be influenced. So that's why I want to put relationship at the top. I should have said, by the way, these titles and these labels are here to be provocative for you as you're going through this process, to really provoke your thinking. I'm sure you haven't actually got enemies, but it may appear that way at times. It may appear that way at times. That might be how it's felt. Sometimes this is about a working hypothesis. So the way you use this is you get from your identify stage 8 to 10 key stakeholders, people who've got a real big opportunity or ability to influence either for or against what you're trying to achieve. For or against. You can't ignore the naysayers, you can't ignore the opposition, and once you've got them, you've then got to place them on this map. And it doesn't quite show it very clearly on here, but in between there's an English flag here in disguise. So there's a grey zone in the middle. And the idea is you just pick one individual and maybe do this as a team effort. Actually talk about it with the project team that you've got around it, some of your direct reports perhaps. Where would you place them on this? And on the relationship side, you're looking for the positive indicators. What is it about this person that makes me believe that they are saying, you know, what they're saying is the truth? Okay? Do they believe me as well? So trust needs to work 2 ways in any good relationship. Also, think about the openness that there is. Because I'm sure we've all got friends who we've thought at one time or another, if only they'd told me something. You know, it would have saved, but they, for whatever reason, decided not to disclose something that could have been useful. If you've got a really good relationship, people will be volunteering that information for you that could be of use to you. That's a good relationship. Obviously, when we're going to the other side, on the left-hand side of this chart, you're looking at people who say one thing and do another. They might agree to something that you're trying to do during the meeting with the steering committee where there's other senior individuals from the institution around, okay, but then they don't follow through with the action. So what we're looking for is the real evidence, particularly on trust. What I quite often find is people either trust somebody or they don't. So it's a big sort of, oh no, I wouldn't trust that person, rather than why you trust them. What is the nature of that trust? To what extent can you trust them? Right? And if you can start to break it down, potentially you can unlock some of these relationships so that you can make more progress. So that's on the relationship side, and on the other side we've got the agreement. Basically, and this is where it really helps if you're very, very clear about what it is you want to achieve, your focus. Right? Because then you can be a little bit more certain, are they on-side or off-side? The way this dimension works, and if you follow the QR code, you can find out more information about this, because it's in the PDF as well, is that apart from agreement, usually somebody who is going up towards the top strongly in agreement has a very strong interest in what you're doing. Maybe it's going to make their promotion. Maybe it's going to help them to achieve or solve a lot of other problems. Maybe they're going to get a big bonus out of what you're doing if you're successful. And usually the higher their level of interest, the more they'll do to help. This isn't influential leadership, isn't about doing it all yourself. Often it is about getting other people to come to the party to do things for you. Unfortunately, with this dimension, the opposite is also true. So the further down you go, the more they're going to lose, the more they'll do to stop you. Okay, and we'll see when we get to strategies in a minute how you can actually start to use this. So the idea is you put the players on the board and then start to see, okay, what do you need to do? And when you take each individual name, what we're asking you to do or suggesting is that you consider a political analysis of them. And I know you're not politicians. I know you prefer to stick to the facts and be very straightforward with people. Right? Just bear with me a moment, because what I want you to do is, this is about understanding the other person. If you understand the other person, you can then start to potentially tailor your pitch, tailor your communication, tailor your engagement for maximum effect. And these are the sort of things that I ask people to consider with each of the individual stakeholders, particularly the most important ones, when deciding how to approach them and how to engage them. And I'm just going to pick up on a couple, because you can read some of the others. For instance, power, a word that gets thrown about quite a lot. I wonder to what extent you actually know what it means. And usually the definition is the ability to get things done, the ability to influence is usually. And what gives those people, so the faculty members will be very, very powerful. People who hold money are usually quite powerful. People who have very good relationships with key individuals can be quite powerful. But the important thing with any individual on your stakeholder map is to know, okay, what makes this individual powerful? Because then you can actually compare it to, well, what makes me powerful? Ooh, not a lot, but so how can you actually counterbalance that? And there's a clue that I'll come back to in a moment on that. Another one that I think is really important is performance. Because if you consider the performance level of the individual, and sometimes these are difficult to find out, but do a bit of intelligence gathering and ask around a little bit. If somebody is under stress, if somebody is not performing, meeting expectations, they may make decisions in a completely different way. So it's important that you start to get a grip on. If they're flying high, then everything's going in their direction. It's going to require a different influencing approach than if they're beleaguered. If they're beleaguered and struggling, you may be able to be their saviour, because you can connect what you want to do with what they're suffering at the moment in a very subtle way, and actually get them potentially to see the merits in a different way. And that's not something you put in a PowerPoint, it's not something you put in a proposal, but it's something that you might have a quiet conversation and actually help them to see that. And another thing I think is really important here is the history. And this is where it's sort of your political intelligence, your political understanding of the organisation is quite key, because the individual that you want to influence on your stakeholder map, what is their background? Where have they come from? Who recruited them into the institution? All of those things are vital things to understand, in which to help you to decide, okay, this is the way I need to engage them. And it may not be a direct intervention. It may be something that you go indirectly through somebody else. Sometimes you can't always have the access that you want to these people. Sometimes you need to go to the people who influence the influencers in order to get the progress, in order to get the buy-in that you want to do. Okay, so that's a little bit about political analysis. As I say, you can read a lot more about it later. And then in terms of coming up with an influencing strategy, how can you, so if that's your game sheet, if that's the stakeholder map that you've got, what needs to change? And here are some of the things that you might like to think about. I mean, one key thing is the grey zone that you couldn't quite see on the slide, the English flag bit. If you've got people in there, what that means is you don't really know them well enough to be able to categorise them. And if you don't know somebody that you're trying to influence, you're going to have a real big struggle, because you're just going to be shooting in the dark. So one of your early steps, particularly with very powerful people, is to find out, okay, where do they stand on this? Have we got a good relationship or not? If you haven't got a relationship, go start a relationship. Find a way to start to get to know them. If you're not sure whether they agree with what you're trying to do, your vision, your purpose, your goal, go and ask them. The clearer you are, the clearer they can be with, yes, I agree, no, I don't agree. Right? Rather than this vague notion. I had one director go through this process and went to his CEO and had a much clearer focus, and the CEO said to him, that's okay, no problem, we can do that. I thought you wanted this. Lack of specificity means assumptions come into the fore. Okay, and that's not good when you're trying to get some real good progress. Another thought, and you might have already started to pick up and wonder about these, is thinking about ignoring the enemies. All right? Best practice would suggest that you need to focus on your advocates, because they're already on side and you've got a good relationship and they can potentially help you an awful lot. The point about the enemies is they're right down in the bottom, so there's low levels of trust. You don't get on terribly well. You probably don't see eye to eye with them, okay? And they disagree and are going to lose out. They're not going to be your friends, okay? There could be opportunities to change that. Maybe you've got some misconceptions you need to rework. But the point is that engaging with an enemy is hard work. It is potentially soul-destroying. You've got to actually overcome not only the relationship, but the resistance to what you're trying to do. So what I'm suggesting here is, and you need to play this very, very carefully, is really understand their position, really understand the threat that they pose to what you're trying to do, and then figure out a strategy to either neutralise or convert it. And it may be that you get somebody else, maybe one of your advocates, to go and have a chat with them on the golf course or wherever they get together for dinner. Okay, that might be an alternate approach. But if you can understand the risks that they pose to your progress, your purpose, what you're trying to achieve, then you can come up with a strategy on how to handle them. And at worst, if you can neutralise the damage that they can cause. Because on this thing, you don't have to get everybody agreeing with you. You just have to get enough power, enough influence in that top box to be able to see you through to the progress. So there's a few thoughts for you there. I'm racing ahead quite quickly now, because I want to turn to this, which is, I think, is something very close to my heart. Because if you were so influential that you could achieve anything you wanted in the world, what would you achieve? Okay, and I see a lot of other people in the world who are in the same sort of territory as me, peddling things like, you know, powers of persuasion and sleight of mouth and all of these other duplicitous ways of manipulating situations into a favourable outcome. And I think that is poor show. I don't think that is necessary, and I'm sure that most people here would agree that, you know, that is not the way to go. A lot of it does happen, and I'm not ignoring that. But what I'm suggesting is that as you grow in influence, as you become a more influential leader, if you can have things like this as a backdrop to what you're doing, the way you are conducting business, I think it will help. And this is just a starter for 10, because what I've also found is that this needs to be internalised. It needs to be most effective, your own internal guidance mechanism to help you sleep at night and to be very authentic. But there's a couple of things I want to pick out on here. Be honest about your own interest, what it is you're trying to achieve. Right? Because if you don't declare your interest in an open and honest way, as in trusting first so that you can be trusted in return, there is a risk here, of course, then they're only going to be thinking, what is that person after? What are you trying to achieve here? What is your agenda? Because the agenda, the one that really drives people, is not the professional agenda, the one that's on the plans and in the strategies. It's the one beneath the service. I want to get promotion. I want to get a new job. I want to get more papers out. Okay, that's what's really driving people. But if you can be very honest and authentic in declaring, okay, this is what I'm hoping to achieve at it, that will help dramatically in achieving in moving towards your objective. And certainly it will help you in the relationship. The other thing that a lot of people miss, and I think it's really understandable, is the drawbacks. Okay? Most of the time, presentations sing the praises of this proposal and that, you know, this is how it will help the institution, this is how it's going to move the university into the 21st century or beyond. But they don't say, but where it's going to hit, where it's going to hurt is here. Right? And I think the understanding is, the emotion is that I don't want to have anything that could sort of alarm people. But the research is actually quite clear that if you don't present the drawbacks to the individual stakeholder that you're trying to get on side, they'll be looking for them. They'll be thinking, they'll be doing the research and thinking, so how is it? Let's face it, you would, wouldn't you? Okay, you'd want to be doing that and actually finding out. And the research is quite clear that if the person who is attempting to influence actually says, look, this is how you're going to lose. There are going to be some downsides to this, and I want it to be absolutely clear. We're going to try and minimise those, and let's work together to see if we can contain all of that, but let's be straight about this. I think there's a very authentic way of doing it. It may be funny you say that. Yeah, okay. Great, because you're not here to actually get an unfair advantage, I wouldn't imagine. You want to get the best outcome as possible for the institution and where you want to take or think the institution needs to go. So I think this is a good, honest way of transacting business. One could say it's a naive way of doing it, right? But this is why I put it out to being your choice and the way you engage with this. Because I was talking to a few people ahead of this about the sort of tendency in UCISA in terms of the way you operate politically. And we know from research that people in technical grades are far less politically active than in other grades, in other types. So general managers, and one bit of research I saw was about of IT people, senior IT people, only 14% are politically active versus general managers, 54%. Politically active doesn't mean you're out there shafting people. Politically active means you are going out there to understand people, understand their vested interests, understand what they're trying to achieve, and then coming back to base and thinking, okay, now how can we craft this solution, this proposal, this idea, so that it best meets the objectives of all concerned for the good of all. That's being politically active. Rather than, and I have worked with IT teams on this, this is the best solution and you'd be mad not to do it. That's not very sensible in terms of gaining the influence and gaining the connection and becoming an influential leader. Okay? So think about these rules, and there's a lot more behind that. Again, you can sort of start to read. But I find that this is a good way of becoming more politically active, but also maintaining your integrity by actually sort of making sure you've got those guideline rules. Okay, I've downloaded enough now. And I don't think we've really got time for any questions. But I want to leave you with something for you, because I began at the start of this presentation saying I want to help you as much as I possibly can. As a result of being invited to present here, I've been thinking about you in your world and the type of work that and some of the challenges that you face. And so I am preparing a special guide, and it's going to be quite a large guide, on how to influence as an IT director or an IS specialist. And if you want that, please sign up for the blog today so that or in some other way, get in touch, either through Twitter, and probably by the middle of next week I'll be able to give you that guide. And that guide will not only help you as an individual go deeper into some of these practices and some of these ideas, but it's also something that you can use with your team. So you will be able to share some of these ideas. Because influence and influential leadership is not a solo activity. Maybe you are the instigator, but you can do more things to become more influential. And the more people you get involved in this in a positive, ethical way, as we were saying earlier, the better. And I've got one final question for you, one final point. And this is probably the one that, if you take nothing else from the last half hour, this is what I'd like you to take. Let me ask you a question. To what extent do you rely on rational persuasion as you're going out there to influence other people within the faculties or within your institution? I wonder. Rational persuasion in and of itself, at best, and this is research-based, at best gains compliance. Compliance means, generally, people are doing something they'd really rather not. Okay? And this is absolutely clear. The problem that poses is that as soon as they leave the meeting, they'll probably go back to doing whatever okay, I know we said that, but we're going to do something differently now. Rational persuasion in and of itself gains compliance. The most effective tactic that research has found is the inspirational persuasion, inspirational appeal. An inspirational appeal is about communicating directly to the other person's values, what they feel important, what they care about. That is the thing. That is the influencing tactic. Out of all the influencing, and there's a whole list of 9 that you can find. It's not my research, it's somebody over in America who's researched this. The inspirational appeal is the most powerful, potent, influencing tactic that you can have. If you back it up with rational persuasion as well, great. But we also know, don't we ever, that sometimes the inspirational appeal, that can be so successful, even when the facts are contrary to people doing that, it's the heart moves them. Okay, so inspirational appeal on its own can actually get the job done, even without rational persuasion. If you back it up with rational persuasion, it's so much the better. And the final point is that it is only possible to do, to make one of these inspirational appeals if you know the other person. Okay, if you've unlocked what it is they care about. And I think this is really where it comes to the heart of what I'm preaching here about influential leadership, is about knowing the other people so that you can actually start to take them forward. Thank you.